Thank God that useless woman is finally gone. Now we can live our lives without her dragging us down," Smith announced gleefully, adjusting his expensive black suit as he stood over his wife's hospital bed. His voice rang with the kind of relief people usually reserve for the end of a long prison sentence. "Finally, baby. Finally," Adama purred, running her manicured fingers down the lapel of his jacket. She perched on the edge of the visitor's chair in her tight black dress and fashionable hat, looking like she'd dressed for a cocktail party rather than a death watch. "No more pretending, no more hiding what we have." They had no idea that every word they spoke landed like a blade in Joanna's conscious mind. They stood in that sterile hospital room, dressed in designer black, planning her funeral with the enthusiasm of wedding planners. They never knew that in exactly 28 days, the woman they were already burying would walk through the door of her own celebration of life, fully awake, fully aware, and ready to dismantle everything they thought they'd won. Hold on. If you want to see Smith and Adama get exactly what they deserve, you need to subscribe right now, because what Joanna does to them in 28 days will be the most satisfying revenge you'll ever witness. Hit that subscribe button, because you do not want to miss how this woman rises from that hospital bed and destroys everything they thought they'd won. Trust me, the payoff is worth it. Joanna lay motionless on the hospital bed, her body wrapped in thin white sheets, her skin cool beneath the hospital's aggressive air conditioning. Tubes snaked from her arms. Wires connected her to machines that beeped with mechanical indifference. The monitors displayed numbers that should have told them the truth. Heart rate 52, blood pressure stable, oxygen saturation 97%. But Smith wasn't checking those screens. He was checking his watch, counting down to freedom. The doctors had declared her comatose. They'd said her chances of waking were uncertain. The people who should have been her family had already decided she was gone. What they didn't know, what they couldn't possibly know, was that Joanna heard everything. She heard Smith's laugh echo off the hospital walls. She heard the scrape of Adama's designer heels against the linoleum floor as she stood and stretched like a cat in the sun. She heard the satisfied sigh that escaped Smith's lips as he looked down at her motionless face. Her mind screamed. Her body betrayed her. She tried to open her eyes. She tried to move her hand, just one finger, anything. Nothing responded. She was a prisoner inside her own flesh. Smith stepped closer to the bed, looming over her. He studied her face the way someone might examine an item they're about to discard. "So this is how it ends," he said softly, almost philosophically. 3 years of cooking my meals, cleaning my house, running around trying to make me happy. He shook his head slowly, a trace of mock sadness crossing his features. "You worked yourself to death trying to please people who never even liked you." "How pathetic," Adama added, leaning against his shoulder with theatrical sympathy. "She was always so desperate. Like if she just did more, served more, smiled more, you'd finally see her as valuable." She paused, letting the cruelty marinate. "But some women just don't have what it takes." They laughed. Not loudly enough to bring a nurse running, not obviously enough to look like monsters, but cruel enough to shatter a soul into fragments. Joanna's trapped mind flooded with memories. She remembered waking at 5 a.m. to prepare breakfast before Smith left for work. She remembered staying up until 1 a.m. to finish laundry because he'd complained about wrinkled shirts. She remembered standing in the kitchen while exhaustion made her hands shake, forcing herself to smile when he walked past without a word of thanks. She remembered the burning pain in her lower back that she ignored because acknowledging it would make her seem weak. She remembered telling herself over and over, "Just try harder, just be better, just prove you're enough." 3 years. 3 years of a marriage built on her effort and his contempt. 3 years of hiding her billions to see if he could love her without the money. 3 years of demands, insults, and the kind of silence that teaches you that you're invisible. Now she lay still, forced to listen as they discussed her life like it had been a minor inconvenience in their grand love story. The door opened with a soft click. Smith's mother entered, her face arranged in an expression of satisfaction poorly disguised as concern. She wore expensive black lace with pearl jewelry at her throat, looking like she'd dressed for the opera rather than her daughter-in-law's potential death. "So it finally happened," she said calmly, clasping her hands together. "I warned her, you know. A woman who does too much forgets her place. A woman who tries too hard makes a man uncomfortable." She approached the bed and looked down at Joanna's still body, clicking her tongue in disapproval. "All that effort, all that running around, and she still failed to keep my son satisfied." She turned to Smith, her expression brightening. "At least now you're free, my son. Free to start over. Free to marry someone accomplished, someone who won't embarrass this family." Free. That word detonated inside Joanna's consciousness. Free from her. She woke to sound before she woke to pain. Laughter. Not loud, not wild, but the quiet, satisfied kind that people share when they believe the world has tilted in their favor. It curled through the room, light at first, then clearer, cutting into her like glass. Joanna tried to breathe. Her chest did not rise. She tried to blink. Her lashes did not move. Her body was a sealed house and she was trapped inside it. Thought was the only thing that obeyed her. She reached for her voice out of instinct, like a drowning person reaches for air, only to find emptiness. Silence filled her throat. Panic wove into her senses slowly, not as a scream, but as a cold realization. She was awake, and she could not move. Not a finger, not a toe, not even the ghost twitch of muscle memory. Every attempt to command her body felt like shouting into a cave where no echo ever returned. And then she heard them more clearly. Smith's voice was nearer, quieter than the laughter, deep and measured as if he had rehearsed calmness. "It won't be long. The doctor said she's barely holding on. A few more hours. Maybe a day." A soft clap of hands followed. Adama's voice arrived bright and cruel, as if this were some comedy performance she'd been waiting to applaud. "Finally," she breathed. "Can you imagine? After everything, freedom. Real freedom." She drew out the words like they tasted sweet in her mouth. Freedom. Joanna tasted iron in the back of her mind. She tried again to move, anything, but her body stayed heavy, distant, useless. The room carried the faint scent of disinfectant and something metallic, keeping her rooted in a world she was not allowed to participate in. Adama leaned closer. Joanna could feel her presence like pressure in the air. "Look at her," she said, chuckling under her breath. "If you can even call this looking. She used to act so strong. Now she just lies there. It's almost funny." She paused as if admiring her cruelty. Pointless life, pointless ending. How fitting. Something inside Joanna flinched even though her body did not. The words burned. They did not scrape the surface. They sank. She wanted to cry, but even tears refused to come. To them, she must have looked like an empty shell. To herself, she felt painfully alive. Smith sighed the way someone does when they feel justified yet tired of the drama around it. "Let's just keep it simple." She goes, "Everything resets. No more complications. No more problems. We can finally live." "We deserve it," Adama replied without hesitation. "After dealing with her? Please. This is the least the universe owes us." Then came another little laugh, sharper this time. Poor Joanna. Never mattered much before. Now, she matters even less. Her mind screamed. Words rammed into each other. How? Why? What did I do? But none of those escaped. Her body was a prison with soundproof walls. She could only listen. They spoke about her as though she were furniture, as though she had never lived, never loved, never struggled, as though she were an obstacle that would soon be conveniently gone. Smith stepped closer. His footsteps were steady, calm, familiar. That was the part that hurt the most. "All we have to do is wait," he murmured. "Nature will handle the rest." Nature. Such a neat word for betrayal. Joanna's thoughts slowed for a heartbeat, as if grief itself wanted silence. Memories tried to rise, faces, conversations, small moments, but they slipped away under the weight of what she was hearing. She felt like the world had already buried her, and these two were simply standing at the grave, waiting for the soil to settle. Adama leaned back with a satisfied hum. "When this is finally over, we'll laugh about how long it took. We'll say it was inevitable." A pause, then another jab of spiteful humor. She can't even defend herself. Can't talk, can't glare, nothing. Just lying there like a sad mannequin. A quiet moment stretched. Monitors hummed softly. The room carried the gentle rhythm of life she was still clinging to. They didn't appreciate that rhythm. They were waiting for it to stop. And something shifted inside her. Not in her muscles, in her mind. A new clarity formed, not frantic, not panicked. Cold, sharp, steady. She might not be able to move, she might not be able to speak, but she could think. She could hear. She could remember. Their words weren't fading. They were carving themselves into her with painful precision. Smith whispered again, softer, almost tender. "Soon," Adama exhaled in relief. Soon. To them, she was a fading thing, a problem about to vanish. But inside the stillness of her body, something refused to disappear. Something tightened, solid and alive. If her body could not hold her, then her mind would. If they thought this silence meant surrender, they had made a mistake. She listened to the sound of their breathing, to the casual weight of their footsteps, to the certainty in their voices. Every sentence was a match scraping against stone. Every insult, every plan, every smug laugh pressed deeper into her memory, engraving itself into a place they could not erase. They believed she was gone already. They had no idea she was still here. She gathered their voices like evidence, storing every syllable, every cruel amusement, every careless confession. Her fear hardened into something else, something that did not shake. Inside the prison of her body, Joanna made a promise with the last strength she owned. "I will remember every single word." They arrived long before compassion did. The elevator doors slid open and announced them like the beginning of a fashion show. Perfume first, then black silk, glossy leather, and that chilly, practiced air of superiority that walks into rooms before their mouths even open. Smith's mother stepped in like the hospital floor was a personal insult. His sister trailed behind, all polished hair and confidence, like a headline waiting to be written. Their outfits were sleek and expensive, every button and zipper whispering that grief, to them, was something to accessorize. They didn't come near my bed. They skimmed the air instead, scanning walls, curtains, floor tiles. The machines hummed softly, the only things in the room genuinely concerned for my life. Smith's mother gave a little sigh, sharp and theatrical. "Goodness, you would think for the price of health care, they'd offer better decor," she said, like she was commenting on hotel wallpaper instead of standing over my unconscious body. Her daughter agreed instantly. "This lighting is terrible. It makes everything look dull. She meant me. I knew she meant me. I screamed inside my head again. It wasn't sound. It was heat. It was frustration. It was a trapped storm that had nowhere to go. My body lay still. My mind didn't. They didn't ask how I was, didn't lean close to whisper encouragement or apology. Instead, they gathered near the window like planners at a brunch table, lowering their voices only to raise their self-importance. "This whole situation is exhausting," Smith's mother sighed as she adjusted her diamond bracelet. "Your brother looks worn down, and honestly, it's just so unnecessary. People survive things worse every day. This dramatic coma is disruptive." Dramatic coma. As if I chose this. As if my silence was a performance. Her daughter tucked her hair behind her ear, something sharp glinting in her eyes. "Have you thought about arrangements?" My heart lurched. Not that they noticed. "Of course," his mother replied calmly. "We must always be prepared. Dignity matters. If she doesn't wake up, the least we can do is ensure everything is tasteful." She paused, a slight smile touching her lips. "Black is flattering on everyone." They went on like it was a social calendar matter. Flowers, seating, photo boards. They debated venues the way people debate vacation spots. His sister even opened her phone to check catering options. "Chicken or fish?" she asked, scrolling carelessly. "I think salmon might feel more sophisticated." "For heaven's sake, not salmon," her mother scoffed. "It makes the room smell. Chicken is safer. People like chicken. Plus, it photographs better." Photographs. Pictures at a funeral. Me as a displayed memory rather than a living person. I wanted to shake the bed. I wanted to rip the wires out and sit up and scream, but I couldn't do anything. I just burned silently. They practiced sadness with their mouths and convenience with their hearts. Every sentence carried a weightless sympathy tied tightly to selfish convenience. My life was a disruption to their image, their schedule, their perfect little world. There was a pause then, a pause that hung like cold air. "At least," Smith's mother added softly, almost kindly in her own twisted way, "now Smith can finally marry someone accomplished." It landed inside me like ice water. Every insult before that had been petty, shallow, cruel. This one carved, accomplished, as though I was a failed project. As though my love, my care, my entire existence had always been a placeholder until someone better came along. They smiled at each other, united in a future where I was not an inconvenience anymore. My rage didn't stay steady. It shook, it roared, it hurt. Beneath it, something stronger sparked. Not just anger, but defiance. A stubborn, bright refusal to be erased by people who couldn't see my worth even when I was standing, laughing, breathing. Now, left with only thoughts, that worth felt louder. They left eventually, satisfied with their plans, their perfumes lingering in the air like an unwanted signature. The room felt quieter once they were gone. The machines hummed gently again, steady and faithful, as if whispering to me not to give up. Somewhere in the distance, I imagined Smith's tired footsteps, his hand that always held mine carefully. The realness of him, the softness, the love, the part of my life that mattered. I wasn't finished. I wasn't done loving. I wasn't done fighting. And I refused to let the story end with them choosing flowers while calling me inconvenient. Inside the stillness, I made a silent promise to myself. I would not go quietly for their comfort. I would claw my way back into breath and light, if only to look them in the eye again and let them see what strength really looks like. Dr. Poe, Adebayo spoke with the careful calm of someone who had said these words many times, but still understood how they could break a person. His glasses sat low on his nose, his voice steady, almost gentle. He explained that the brain behaved like a stubborn gate. Sometimes it opened again within weeks, sometimes never. He said patients like Joanna usually return within 30 days. If they do not, families begin to face choices that never feel like choices, only burdens disguised as responsibility. He did not dress it with false hope. He did not numb it with cold detachment. He simply placed the truth in the room like a sealed envelope and waited for them to accept it existed. Smith stared at him with polite intensity, nodding at the right moments, absorbing every detail. Adama, standing beside him, held her breath without realizing she was doing it. She had grown used to the machines, the quiet clicks and soft humming monitors, but this was different. This was a timer quietly snapping into place. "She has 30 days, the doctor said, and his eyes softened as if he wished he could erase the number himself. "After that, it becomes unlikely, and decisions will need to be made." He spoke about reassessments, evaluations, options, life support conversations, the future no one wants to imagine but is always lurking like a shadow on hospital floors. Adama's fingers slipped into Smith's palm, squeezing as if she could pass strength through touch. He did not squeeze back at first. He only stared. Then slowly, a strange light appeared behind his eyes. Not tears, not fear. Something else entirely, something sharp, something hungry. He thanked the doctor with the voice of a man playing the role of a worried husband. The doctor nodded, said he would be available for any questions, and left the room with the hush of rubber soles against polished tiles. The door clicked softly, and silence took over again. The kind of silence that makes your thoughts feel too loud. 30 days. Smith exhaled at last, slow and thoughtful, like someone solving a difficult puzzle. He looked at Joanna, at the stillness of her face, the quiet rise and fall of her chest that was no longer really hers but supported by machines. He reached for her hand, not out of affection, but as someone might touch a valuable object while thinking of ownership rather than love. Adama was still standing beside him. Her eyes were wet. Her heart was heavy. She was grieving a woman who wasn't dead but also wasn't here. She whispered Joanna's name softly, as if a quiet, loving voice could pull someone out of darkness when science could not. Her thumb traced slow circles over his knuckles, hoping to steady him. Smith was steady, too steady. His mind was already opening drawers and pulling out files. Insurance clauses, benefit timelines, hospital cost thresholds, asset documents, legal terms like power of attorney and spousal rights. He remembered conversations he'd once ignored from the insurance agent who talked too much. Now every boring detail of those meetings glowed with sudden value. He could almost hear the numbers aligning, forming neat little rows of supposed relief. 30 days could be endured. 30 days could be managed. 30 days could be planned around. The human heart might break under pressure, but paperwork thrived in it. He whispered something that might have sounded like concern, a sentence shaped in the rhythms of love, yet hollow in its center. Adama didn't notice the emptiness. She only heard the surface and clung to it because that is what kind people do. She leaned closer to Joanna and promised her she would be here every day, every hour she could manage. She promised comfort, prayers, warmth. Somewhere beneath the quiet, unseen by any of them, Joanna heard. Not with ears, with something deeper and more desperate. Her mind, fogged and distant, flinched awake like a trapped bird brushing against cage bars. The world she was in had no walls she could touch, only heaviness and sound like she was underwater. but the words 30 days threaded themselves through the haze with terrible clarity. 30 days or nothing. 30 days or she would be left behind, trapped inside still flesh people would mistake for silence. Buried alive echoed in her like a scream she could not make. Her thoughts tried to move as her body refused. Panic flooded through the quiet place she was drifting in. She pushed, strained, reached for muscles that no longer obeyed commands. Nothing responded. The body she had trusted her whole life was a locked house, and she was pounding on the inside of the door. Smith's thoughts crackled like static over the fragile stillness in the room. His gaze sharpened with quiet calculation while his face wore the practiced concern of a man others would call strong for staying collected. He thought about what life would look like without hospital bills, without uncertainty, without a woman who could wake and remember things, without complications. Adama thought about laughter. She thought about mornings where Joanna's teasing voice had filled the kitchen. She remembered arguments that ended in hugs, how Joanna hated cold tea, how she always tucked her toes under someone else's leg when watching TV because she rarely felt warm enough. Adama held memories as if they were ropes that might pull Joanna back. Joanna, hearing nothing and everything, clung to one thought like a lifeline. She had 30 days to fight through darkness thick enough to drown in, 30 days to claw toward light no one could show her, 30 days to prove she was still here, trapped but breathing, terrified of a fate worse than death because it was silent and polite and signed with documents. 30 days. The clock had started. Darkness pressed against Joanna like a living thing, heavy and strangely patient, as if it had all the time in the world to keep her trapped. There was no sense of where the room began or ended, just the low, dizzying throb in her head and the quiet ringing in her ears. With nothing else to hold on to, her mind slid backward, searching for something solid, something real, something that reminded her who she was before everything twisted into this nightmare. She remembered the smell of fresh paper and old wood inside the hall where she stood on graduation day, that proud stillness before applause breaks loose. Her name had been called, and for a heartbeat, the world had gone quiet. Not because anyone doubted she would top the class, but because everyone already expected greatness from her. Cameras flashed. Her parents cried. Professors shook her hand with a respect that carried weight. She stood there in her gown, smiling for everyone, while a quiet fire burned inside her chest. That fire wasn't for praise or applause. It was hunger, an almost stubborn need to prove that her life was not going to be written by chance. Years blurred into long nights of glowing screens, burnt coffee, and ideas that sounded foolish until they suddenly did not. She was 24 when she signed the final papers for her first startup, her fingers shaking not from fear but from excitement so sharp it almost hurt. There was nothing glamorous in those early months. There were arguments with developers who slept in office chairs, silent tears in restroom mirrors when deals collapsed, stubborn smiles in investor meetings where they called her impressive for someone so young. She fought through it, not because she enjoyed struggle, but because giving up felt like betrayal to the version of herself who had once dreamed fiercely under a graduation cap. Then Maverick Industries happened. She was 28 when the board voted, the room filled with men twice her age, their voices edged with disbelief even as they said yes. CEO. A title that meant power to others, but felt more like a heavier crown to her. Overnight, she became a headline, a symbol, a constant discussion point for talk shows and financial analysts. Money stopped being a number. It became a magnet, pulling the worst kinds of attention into her life. Friends began speaking to her like each joke had a price tag. Every smile came with expectation. Every relationship carried suspicion. She couldn't tell who cared and who calculated. There were people who lingered too long at parties, laughing at everything she said, men who studied her like a project, women who insisted they only wanted to be close to greatness. She learned to see the little flicker in their eyes, that quick mental math when they remembered how much she was worth. It ate at her, not loudly, but slowly, like rust working its way through metal while the outside still looked polished. So when she went to that charity event, she did something reckless in the most human way. She hid. She wore a simple dress instead of the kind stylists insisted on. She pinned her hair back herself, without a professional team breathing around her. She signed in as a volunteer coordinator and blended into the background. For one night, she wasn't a billionaire. She was just Joanna, a woman handing out programs, checking guest names, guiding lost people toward the right tables. That was where she met him. Smith's smile wasn't wide or overly charming. It was warm in a way that felt unperformed. He carried himself without that hungry, lean people often had when they knew who she was. He didn't crowd her with flattery. He didn't mention investments. He didn't tilt conversations toward her success like everyone else did. They joked about the chaos of organizing charity events. They laughed at small mishaps. He asked about what she actually enjoyed instead of what she owned. She remembered thinking that maybe she'd finally stepped out of the strange glass box her wealth had built around her. For the first time in a long while, she let her guard relax. She told him small truths about insomnia, about the strange loneliness that comes with success, about loving simple mornings with no scheduled meetings. He listened. He didn't rush her. He didn't stare at her like a prize. He made her feel seen as a person, not a figure on a financial magazine cover. That memory twisted now, sharp and cruel. She remembered the way his tone shifted over time. Little questions that sounded casual but aimed precisely at pieces of her life she rarely shared. He began to know things he should not have known unless someone had dug deeper. He asked about power structures, about board politics, about vulnerabilities disguised as friendly curiosity. And still, she chose to believe the softer version of him because she was tired of being suspicious of everyone. She remembered the first time she caught that faint shadow in his eyes, a flicker of calculation that vanished fast enough to make her wonder if she imagined it. She pushed the thought away, like she had pushed away so many warnings before. She wanted someone to want her, not her empire. She wanted to believe she wasn't foolish to crave something as simple as genuine affection. Then everything shattered. Now here she was, swallowed by darkness, the echo of his betrayal louder than any physical pain. The memory of that first night at the charity event stung most of all. The girl who had whispered to herself, "Finally, someone who wants me, not my bank account." That girl had been hopeful, trusting, brave in a naive human way. She lay there and faced the bitter truth no headline had ever printed about Joanna, the billionaire genius, the unstoppable CEO. She wasn't just powerful or brilliant or wealthy. She was also someone who wanted to be loved without calculation, someone who was tired of being a trophy, someone who believed kindness was real, and she was someone who had been terribly, heartbreakingly wrong. Adama came in like a burst of sunshine no one asked for, the kind that blinds instead of brightens. She didn't knock, didn't soften her steps, didn't lower her voice to match the quiet, life-and-death rhythm of the hospital. She walked straight to Joanna's bedside, greeted Smith with a smile that felt rehearsed, then dumped a stack of glossy magazines across the bed, right over Joanna's motionless legs. 15 days, she announced like she was reading the time from a clock. If this woman insists on staying asleep, the least she can do is let us plan how fabulous I'll look when everyone's crying over her. She flipped the magazine open and leaned into Smith, shoulders pressing comfortably against him as if grief were a cushion instead of a weight. Joanna felt the movement, the warmth shift, the air ripple. She couldn't lift a finger. She couldn't twitch an eyelid. Her body stayed trapped, while her mind clawed and screamed and reached for anything that would move. Adama turned the page and tapped a photo with her nail. Now look at this one. Black, elegant, but it hugs the body. The slit is a little high, though. She tilted her head and grinned. Too sexy for a widow? Smith laughed, that deep laugh he used to save for Joanna when life felt heavy. Nothing is too sexy for you, he said, like it was a compliment and not a quiet betrayal in a room where silence had already said too much. Joanna's consciousness burned. Adama held the page up, making a show of studying it like she was considering a career-defining decision. You're right. I can't exactly walk around in a sack and pretend I'm devastated. People expect class. People expect presence. People expect me. She winked at Smith, and he shook his head with amusement, as if this was all lighthearted, as if this was normal, as if the woman dying slowly beside them was just a schedule inconvenience they needed to dress around. Then Adama's hand slipped casually into her purse. She didn't pull out lipstick or a phone or tissues. She pulled out Joanna's jewelry. Familiar pieces. Personal pieces. The gold bracelet Joanna wore on every anniversary. The necklace she had bought herself when she finally earned enough to celebrate who she had become. The ring she never lent out. There they were, stolen from her house, resting in another woman's hands like they always belonged there. My girl doesn't need these anymore, Adama said lightly. May as well keep them warm. She stood, walked to the bathroom mirror like she was backstage at a fashion show, and began trying them on. Turning her head left, turning it right. Admiring herself while Joanna lay frozen a few feet away. The bathroom light made the jewelry shimmer. Joanna remembered the feel of that chain against her skin, the weight of it on good days, the comfort of it on hard days. Today it felt like a knife she couldn't push out of her chest. Smith didn't stop her. He didn't say, put that back. He didn't say, that belongs to my wife. He just watched, shoulders relaxed, amused, oddly quiet, as if grief had softened him enough to let disrespect slide. Or maybe grief hadn't softened him at all. Maybe it had simply rearranged him. Adama laughed softly, adjusting the necklace. Maybe I'll wear this one to the funeral. Or maybe keep it for after. The after lingered in the air like smoke after fire. A possibility spoken too comfortably. A nurse walked in, carrying a clipboard, and that careful professional smile hospital workers wear when emotions might spill. She stopped. She saw the magazines. She saw Smith's lazy grin. She saw Joanna's jewelry gleaming on someone else's neck. Her smile faltered the slightest bit, flickering like a candle near a breeze. Adama caught her eye in the mirror. Just deciding on funeral fashion, she said brightly, spinning once like a model. You know how it is. One must mourn beautifully. The nurse swallowed. Nurses see pain, cruelty, love, denial, and madness. But this had a different kind of wrong threaded through it. Something indecent, not because it was loud, but because it dared to be cheerful. That looks nice, the nurse murmured, because sometimes survival at work sounds like politeness. Joanna wanted to break the bed rails. She wanted to leap up, rip the jewelry back, scream every word trapped in her head. Her thoughts hammered at her skull. Her spirit shook the walls of her own body. Nothing moved, not even a finger twitched. Her breath machine hummed, uncaring. Her heart monitor beeped, mechanical and steady, like it didn't know Betrayal had walked into the room wearing her necklace. Adama strutted back out of the bathroom and sank beside Smith again, satisfied with her reflection and her decisions, completely at ease in a room that should have humbled her. She touched Joanna's hand, not gently but possessively, like she was touching a trophy. Hurry up and decide, sweetheart, she whispered to the body that could not answer. People are waiting. Inside the silence, Joanna screamed louder than any living person ever could. On the 21st day, the world inside Joanna feels like a stalled engine that finally coughs. It is not a grand awakening or a dramatic gasp of air. It is a whisper, a flicker, a suggestion that her body remembers how to obey her. It starts with her index finger, a twitch so faint that if someone were standing over her, they might think it was nothing more than a trick of light, a flicker in the air, a muscle settling. But she feels it. She feels it like a secret message tapped against the walls of a locked room. She is not gone. She is not finished. Something inside her has chosen movement. Time stretches differently when you cannot speak, cannot scream, cannot sit up and point and accuse. Seconds rearrange themselves into an existence where patience is not a virtue, but a weapon. She begins testing her body the way you test the quiet in a room to see if someone else is there. Can she move her toe? Yes. Barely. Can she shift her eyelid? Yes. Like lifting a brick with silk thread. Each day offers a new inch of stolen territory, and she takes it back without celebration. This cannot be rushed. Rushing belongs to people who feel safe. She does not. She listens instead. Voices drift around her bed. Shoes scrape floors. Fabric brushes fabric. Machines whisper their constant lullabies. There are people who assume she is nothing but a body held together by medicine and obligation. They talk near her as if her ears have retired. Some sound guilty. Some sound afraid. Some sound entirely too comfortable. She lets them all speak. She stores their words the way a storm collects power just by existing. By the time her eyelid obeys her completely, she has learned something about power that she never understood before. It does not always live in people who are loud. Sometimes it hides inside stillness. Sometimes it waits inside quiet bodies mistaken for losses. On the 27th day, she wakes without witnesses. Waking is not sudden. It arrives in layers. First comes weight, her body reminding her that it is more than a vessel. Then comes clarity. She gathers the room inside her mind and recognizes every shadow, the ceiling light, the smell of disinfectant pretending to be comfort, the vase someone brought once and then forgot to refresh. Somewhere, a chair complains as someone shifts their weight, but no one is watching her. It is perfect. She opens her eyes. The world doesn't gasp. Trumpets do not blast. Angels do not cheer. The universe does not announce a miracle. It happens in silence. She lets them close again. Once, twice, testing, controlling, owning the movement. Then she stops. Not because she cannot continue, but because she understands something sharp and electric. She has time, and she has advantage. If she wakes now, the story ends in the tidy way people like. Relief, tears, second chances, apologies that arrive late and sound rehearsed. She knows better. The truth is not tidy. The truth is dangerous, and she wants it. They think she is gone in every way that matters. They have said things around her as though confessing to furniture. They have comforted each other in the presence of a woman they believed was unable to hear. They have made plans, quiet plans, unspoken assumptions, plans about her life, plans about her death, plans about what comes after her, as if she were already past tense. So she waits. Waiting becomes strategy instead of suffering. She practices movements in secret, choosing moments when footsteps fade and conversations leave the room. A toe tapping an invisible rhythm. A hand curling around a truth it intends to hold. Her eyelids flutter, not from weakness, but rehearsal. She feels like someone learning to stand in the dark. Muscles remembering trust one breath at a time. There are days when anger arrives like a spark in a dry forest. There are days when sadness sits on her chest with quiet weight. But stronger than both is something colder, steadier, almost calm. Determination is not loud inside her. It is patient. It speaks in statements instead of shouts. You will not rush this. You will not warn them. You will not give away the gift of their ignorance. So she lets them continue. She lets them grieve in advance, whispering about what happens if she never comes back. She lets them argue in corners about who did enough, who did too little, who remembers what happened and who conveniently doesn't. She lets them pretend to be innocent in the safety of what they believe is silence. She plans instead. Her mind designs the future the way architects draft cities. She knows exactly what she wants now. She wants the truth dragged into daylight by its collar. She wants accountability rearranged into something real. She wants every lie spoken near her bed to learn what fear feels like when truth wakes up and looks it in the eye. One thought keeps her steady. Let them keep digging. Let them shovel with words and secrets and false comfort, each day believing they are safe. Let them prepare the speeches. Let them mourn the version of her that cannot return. She will wake when the ground beneath them feels firm. Then she will move, not as a miracle, but as consequence. They will plan her funeral. She intends to attend. Day 30 carried the kind of silence that feels heavy, like a room holding its breath. The hospital smelled of disinfectant and stale hope. Machines hummed softly, loyal but indifferent witnesses to everything human beings were feeling. Dr. Adebayo walked in with that careful expression doctors use when they don't want to sound cruel but also refuse to lie. He examined Joanna again, waited a few long seconds that stretched too far, then turned to Smith with an exhausted calm and spoke about next steps, as though grief could be scheduled like a business appointment. Smith nodded with the solemn dignity of a man already rehearsing his tragedy. He didn't cry. He didn't beg. His face carried that polished sadness that photographs well. By afternoon, plans were underway. By evening, Smith's house transformed into a carefully staged theater of mourning. Not mourning for a death that had happened, but for one he had decided to accept early. The living room glowed with dim, expensive lighting. Waiters moved quietly with polished trays, offering wine that cost more than most people's rent. People arrived in waves, strangers' perfume mixing with the scent of catered food. They spoke softly, as if whispering made them deeper, as if sadness sounded more authentic when performed gently. Many of them barely knew Joanna. Some knew her only by the stories Smith had crafted over years, softened where convenient, sharpened where useful. Adama ruled the house like a queen of sorrow. She wore a long black gown that was far too glamorous for grief, a dramatic hat tilting over one eye like a theatrical wink at tragedy. She greeted every guest with practiced compassion, touching hands, patting shoulders, owning the evening as though grief had a red carpet. She smiled without warmth, impressed by the attention, feeding on it like a plant that had finally found its sun. The celebration of life, as Smith insisted on calling it, unfolded with curated sadness. A slideshow played quietly in the background, Joanna's smile looping again and again in still images, frozen happiness projected for strangers to applaud. People murmured about how strong Smith was. They admired how dignified he appeared in suffering. Smith barely touched his glass of wine. He walked from guest to guest, anointed with sympathy, speaking softly, graciously, like grief royalty greeting loyal subjects. When he finally asked for attention, the room settled into silence. Glasses paused midair. Conversations dissolved. Smith stepped forward and stood near the fireplace, backlit by warm light that made him look almost saintly. He began to speak with gentle authority, thanking everyone for coming, thanking them for loving Joanna, even if many of them didn't know her beyond rumor and polite interaction. He spoke about burden, about faith, about courage in the face of heartbreak. He said he had chosen grace, chosen to face life's cruelty with dignity. His voice trembled beautifully in all the right places, like a well-practiced monologue. There were nods, soft sighs, the occasional dab of a handkerchief. He was performing pain, and the audience adored him for it. Then the front door opened. No one noticed at first. The sound didn't fit the script, like a wrong note in a polished orchestra. Heads turned slowly. The air shifted. It was the kind of moment that doesn't feel real at first because the brain refuses to allow it. Standing there, framed by the doorway, was Joanna. Awake, upright, breathing, wearing white. Not hospital white. Not ghostly white. Just a simple white dress that caught the light and made her look alive in a way none of the photographs could. Life pulsed from her presence, stubborn, undeniable, ordinary, and miraculous at the same time. For a second, the world paused. The music might as well have stopped breathing. Everyone stared, frozen between politeness and horror. Adama's face drained of confidence first, her practiced poise cracking as fear flickered across her eyes. Several guests gasped, their expressions torn between shock and something almost offensive. Disappointment. As if tragedy had been promised and suddenly canceled, a glass slipped from someone's hand and shattered. Wine spread slowly across the polished floor like a strange, embarrassed apology. Smith didn't move. His lips parted, but no words came out. His carefully curated sorrow shattered in silence. For a beat, he looked like a child caught doing something he shouldn't. Every sentence he had spoken minutes earlier now hung in the air, ridiculous and cruel under the weight of reality. Joanna walked further in, steady but pale, like someone returning from a very long, confusing dream. She didn't speak right away. She took in the crowd, the decorations, the well-dressed strangers holding grief like a fashion accessory. Her expression hardened. This wasn't relief or gratitude in her eyes. It was betrayal wrapped in exhaustion. So much unsaid filled the room. 30 days of expectation. 30 days of decisions made without her. 30 days where love should have looked like faith, but instead turned into spectacle. Someone whispered her name as though unsure she was real. Someone else crossed themselves. The carefully arranged night collapsed, leaving only raw humanity behind. Messy, unplanned, painfully honest. Smith finally took a breath, stepping forward as if he might regain control of the narrative. But the truth had already taken the stage. Joanna, standing there in white, said everything that needed to be said. Life had walked into its own funeral, and nothing could ever go back to pretending again. The house that had been buzzing with tasteful sorrow fell into uneasy quiet. The scene stopped being a ceremony and became something far more uncomfortable. Truth demanding to be seen. The room falls into a strange kind of silence that doesn't feel empty at all. It feels crowded, swollen with shock and fear, like the air itself has become a living thing pressing into everyone's lungs. Smith's hand trembles so badly that the wine glass slips from his fingers. It crashes to the marble floor, splintering into sharp little truths that glitter under the chandelier. Someone lets out a soft, startled sound. Adama's perfectly done smile collapses as she gasps, her hand flying to her mouth so quickly that her red lipstick streaks across her skin like a careless brushstroke on a ruined painting. All the noise from moments earlier, laughter, music, whispered gossip, dies as if someone flipped a switch. Then there is the voice, clear, steady, familiar in a way that hits everyone in the chest. I hope you're all enjoying my house, eating my food, drinking my wine. It is like thunder disguised as calm. Conversations that were supposed to start never find courage. Heads turn in unison, eyes widening, mouths parting as the impossible stands breathing in front of them. Joanna, silent for 30 long days, gone without explanation, rumored dead, rumored missing, rumored broken, and yet there she is, dressed simply, standing like judgment in human form. Nobody moves. Smith's face drains of color. He stares at her as though looking long enough might force the world back into the story he prefers. His tongue feels too big in his mouth when he tries to speak. Joanna, what is this? I don't understand. This. He gestures weakly around, still clinging to a version of reality. This is my house. Joanna smiles. It isn't kind. It isn't warm. It is slow and deliberate, a smile that feels like winter sunlight. Bright, but offering no comfort. No, she says softly, and softness somehow hurts more than shouting would. It is not. Nothing here is yours. Her gaze sweeps across the chandeliers, the walls, the grand staircase, the priceless art pieces. Then, without hurry, her eyes come back to Smith. It has never been. People shift, uncomfortable. Someone whispers a prayer. Someone else mutters her name like a question. She takes a single step forward and it feels like a verdict landing. My name, she continues, raising her chin just slightly, is Joanna Okonkwo, CEO of Maverick Industries. It is as if a bomb goes off without sound. There is a tremor through the crowd. Eyebrows shoot up. Bodies lean forward involuntarily. Faces flicker with recognition. The name doesn't belong to rumor. It belongs to headlines, to business magazines, to elite conferences normal people only see on TV, to whispered conversations about money that sounds unreal. Maverick Industries, a corporate beast everyone has heard of but never expects to meet. Adama's chest rises and falls too quickly. Her fingers still hover at her mouth, lipstick smeared, dignity cracking like porcelain. She looks from Joanna to Smith, like a child suddenly realizing she has been playing house in someone else's mansion. Joanna continues, her voice steady enough to slice. Net worth estimated at $2.3 billion. You want the truth? She tilts her head slightly. You've been living in my truth. Smith's lips tremble. His mind scrambles like a man trying to collect water with bare fingers. Joanna, please. What do you mean? This house? The cars? Brightstone? My position? Your position? Joanna's laugh is not loud but carries through the room with humiliating clarity. You mean the job that exists because I willed it into existence? Brightstone Financial signed its biggest partnership because Maverick Industries decided it would be convenient. The board loved you because I told them to. You smiled, thinking you were climbing, not realizing the ladder belonged to me. The truth lands like blows. There are years hidden in her voice. Silent years. Watching, funding, guiding, being underestimated, and perhaps being hurt. You didn't build anything, Joanna says quietly. You were carried. Smith shakes his head again and again. Like fear itself is a buzzing insect he can deny by refusing to let it land. Joanna, stop. What are you saying? You disappeared. You left me. I handled things. I took control. You played king in a palace that wasn't yours, she replies. Her tone is not angry. That is what makes it terrifying. Anger might have been easier to digest. This is control, calculation, a mind that has already thought through every move long before tonight. A queen who deliberately let the board think she had fallen, only to walk back and find out what everyone truly is without her shadow shielding them. Eyes in the room begin to change. People who admired Smith now look at him differently, measuring him anew. Friends become strangers. Opportunists start mentally rearranging loyalties. The room shifts without movement. Someone somewhere near the back whispers, "Maverick," as if the word alone explains why their hearts are racing. Joanna's gaze softens only for a second, like a curtain fluttering before falling back into place. "You wore a crown that belonged to me," she says quietly. "And now the owner has returned." Silence again, thick, heavy, full of all the things no one has courage to ask. Smith swallows, throat dry, pride cracked wide open. There is terror in his eyes now. Realization crawls slowly through him, relentless. Everything he bragged about, every dinner in this mansion, every arrogant speech, every moment he acted like he owned the world, all of it borrowed, all of it hers. And now, the lender has come home. Joanna didn't tremble when she pulled out her phone. Her fingers didn't shake, her breath didn't hitch, and her voice didn't waver. The room was heavy with black fabric, artificial grief, and the awkward silence of people who had come to bury a woman who refused to stay dead. She pressed the speaker button and held the phone between herself and the man who had written her off as gone, useless, finished. Her tone was calm, controlled, almost frightening in how steady it sounded. "James, this is Joanna Okonkwo," she said. Every syllable was crystal clear. "I'm terminating Smith Okoro effective immediately. Remove his access, revoke his credentials, and ensure he's blacklisted from every financial institution we partner with." No hesitation, no remorse, no mercy. The voice on the other end responded almost instantly. "Consider it done, Ms. Okonkwo." The room heard it. The walls heard it. Smith heard it louder than anyone. Something snapped in his expression. Shock cracked into raw anger. His face flushed as though everything he'd built his pride on had just been dragged into daylight and burned in front of everyone. He lunged forward, not because he could stop what was happening, but because he needed to feel like he still had power somewhere. "Joanna, are you insane? After everything? After the money I spent? Do you know what this funeral cost? Do you know how I looked? Do you know the humiliation? You let me mourn you. He wasn't mourning. He was raging because the script had flipped and he was no longer the one controlling it. The words tumbled out of him like a man desperately grasping for dignity that had already evaporated. Joanna didn't step back. She didn't blink. She didn't soften. "You threw a party to celebrate my death while I was still alive," she replied quietly. There was steel in it. "I'm just making sure you understand what death actually feels like." Something in those words chilled the room, because it wasn't loud, it wasn't dramatic, and it wasn't meant to entertain any audience. It was simply truth served cold. Autumna stood there for a moment, still in her elaborate hat, the one she'd chosen to match the somber elegance of Joanna's supposed passing. For a woman who had laughed earlier, who had performed sympathy with such confidence, the shift was immediate. Smith wasn't a grieving widower anymore. He wasn't a man wronged. He was a liability, an exposed fraud, a sinking ship, and she had no intention of going down with him. "Joanna, listen. I didn't know," Autumna stammered as she slowly backed toward the door, peeling away from Smith as if he carried a contagious disaster. "He lied to me. He didn't tell me. I thought Smith said—" Every excuse collapsed under its own weakness. She removed the funeral hat as though it suddenly weighed too much for her head, as though it carried shame, and she slipped out of the room with hurried steps, eager to escape before anyone grouped her with him. The guests remained silent, shifting, unsure whether to stay or disappear. Smith stood there alone, staring at the space where his false alliances evaporated, abandoned even by those who benefited most from his deceit while it lasted. Joanna didn't look at him again. There was no need. She turned with quiet dignity, the white of her suit cutting like a blade through the ocean of black clothing around her. Every step she took echoed something larger than anger. It echoed closure. It echoed liberation. The ground did not belong to him anymore. The house did not belong to the lies anymore. Her life did not orbit his ego anymore. Each movement felt like reclaiming oxygen after years of breathing through someone else's filter. She wasn't rushing. She wasn't running. She walked out the same way she walked into new boardrooms, into negotiations, into any place she chose to exist, fully aware of her worth, fully aware that she didn't need to scream to be powerful, fully aware that a woman who survives being buried does not return to apologize for making people uncomfortable. Behind her, there was nothing left for Smith to cling to, no audience to pity him, no woman to hide behind, no partnership to exploit. He stood there among wreaths meant for her and realized every condolence word spoken today was actually meant for him. Everything he thought he orchestrated had collapsed in his hands, and it wasn't an accident. It wasn't fate. It was a consequence. Joanna didn't glance back to see him crumble because that moment didn't belong to him anymore. This moment belonged to her. The air outside felt lighter than anything she had breathed in a long time. The sky didn't care about his shouting. The ground didn't care about the funeral decorations. Life had kept moving while they danced around her imaginary grave, and now she was stepping fully into it again. She didn't need revenge speeches, dramatic scenes, or lingering bitterness. What she needed was exactly what she had just done. A clean sever, a door closed, a final page turned without spilling ink on new chapters. Her heels touched the pavement. Her shoulders remained high. She walked forward, away from the version of herself that ever shrank so someone else could feel taller. Away from every whisper that said she needed to tolerate, endure, or bend. Away from a love story that was never love, only possession dressed as devotion. The future waiting ahead was unknown, but it was hers, fully, fiercely, quietly powerful. And for the first time in a long while, she didn't feel like she had to apologize for existing. Thank you for sticking around with me, my wonderful story family. Before you go, I'd love to ask you for a small favor. If you enjoyed this story, please subscribe to the channel. It helps me more than you can imagine and keeps these videos coming. The link is right below the video. Drop your location below. I want to know where my story family is watching from, because tomorrow I will be giving you another story just as interesting as this one, and you don't want to miss it.